I have to admit something. When I first saw the news clips of Pope Leo XIV landing in Algeria last month, I almost scrolled past. The headlines were all about Trump and the war in Iran. The press cared about politics. And if you are anything like me, you assumed the trip was just another diplomatic photo op. But I was wrong, because on April 14th, 2026, the Pope did something no Pope in 2,000 years has ever done. He walked onto African soil and prayed at the tomb of an African father of the church, and almost nobody in the secular press told you what that actually meant. Today I want to show you. We are going to walk from a Hebrew word in the book of Hosea through the Holy Family hiding in Egypt, all the way to a basilica in modern Annaba, where the Bishop of Rome quietly knelt down and confessed where Catholic theology really comes from. For most of my Catholic life, I carried a quiet assumption I never bothered to examine. I assumed Africa received the faith. From Europe, from missionaries. That was the picture in most of the news coverage of the Pope's recent trip. But the older I got and the more I studied, the more I began to realize that this picture is not just incomplete, it is upside down. Here is the question no one in the press wanted to ask when the Bishop of Rome chooses, as the very first major destination of his pontificate, to go to Hippo Regius in modern Algeria, to the cathedral seat of St. Augustine. What is he actually saying about where the Catholic Church comes from? Imagine a family that spent generations believing their grandfather was born in Italy, only to discover he was actually born in Africa. That is the moment Pope Leo XIV just gave us. And the spiritual stakes are real. If we keep telling African Catholics that they are recipients of a European faith, they will never fully own what was always theirs. If we keep picturing the church as European, we will keep being scandalized that Catholicism is growing fastest in Africa. If you are interested in deepening your faith, hit like and tell me where you are watching from. Consider subscribing to stay rooted in Catholic truth. Support our videos, team, and tools. Link in description or scan the QR code on screen. But where does this teaching actually come from? It comes from Scripture itself. Open the book of the prophet Hosea, chapter 11, verse 1. God speaks through the prophet and says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." The Hebrew word for Egypt here is Mizraim. It literally carries the sense of a narrow place, a place of constraint. But in the Hebrew imagination, Mizraim was never only bondage, it was also the place where God preserved his people. Joseph was sent into Egypt so that Israel could survive a famine. Moses was raised in Egypt so that Israel could be led out. Egypt was Israel's hidden cradle. Now, with all of this background in mind, let us turn to the New Testament. Open the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 15. An angel tells Joseph to take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. And then Matthew says something extraordinary. He says, "This happened so that the prophet's words might be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I called my son." Notice here what Matthew is doing. He is telling us that the same Africa that hid Joseph, the same Africa that raised Moses, is now the Africa that hides the infant Christ. Africa is not a footnote. Africa is the cradle, and it does not stop there. Open Acts of the Apostles, chapter 8, verses 26 through 40. The first Gentile convert, recorded by name, is the Ethiopian Eunuch, an African, baptized while reading the prophet Isaiah, chapter 53. Open the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 15, verse 21. The man conscripted to carry the cross alongside Christ is Simon of Cyrene, a North African. When we step back and lay this out clearly, the parallels are impossible to miss. Africa appears at every hinge of the biblical drama. The patriarchs, the Exodus, the Incarnation, the Passion, Pentecost, and the very first baptism beyond Israel. This is not my private theory. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 830, teaches that the Church is Catholic, from the Greek kata holon, meaning according to the whole. And listen to Tertullian, writing in Carthage, North Africa, in the early 3rd century. He is the man who first coined the Latin word trinitas, Trinity. The vocabulary of Latin theology was forged in African soil before Rome ever used it. Listen to St. Augustine himself, an African bishop, whose writings on grace shaped 16 centuries of Catholic and Protestant theology. So what does this mean practically for you today? It means that every time you walk into Mass, you are entering a liturgy that was partly forged in Africa. Consider the dogma of Theotokos, the title Mother of God. That dogma was not defined in Rome. It was defended at the Council of Ephesus in the year 431 by Saint Cyril, Patriarch of Alexandria, an African bishop. The Coptic liturgy of St. Mark, still celebrated today in Egypt, is one of the oldest Eucharistic liturgies in continuous use anywhere on earth. Its structure runs parallel to the Roman canon. The Ethiopian Tewahedo Church, Tewahedo meaning made one, preserves the Ark of the Covenant typology more vividly than any liturgy in the West. Every parish church has a tabot, a sacred replica of the Ark, in its sanctuary. In other words, the Mass you attend on Sunday has African DNA woven into its bones. Here is the misconception I want to correct directly because I held it myself once. Many Christians assume that Christianity arrived in Africa with European colonizers in the 18th and 19th centuries. That picture is simply wrong, and I think it persists because the Vandal invasions of the 5th century and the Islamic conquests of the 7th century erased the visible African churches from the Western imagination. But the doctrinal record never forgot. Christianity was rooted in Egypt within a decade of the resurrection. The Coptic Church traces itself to St. Mark, the evangelist. The Ethiopian Church traces itself to the Eunuch in Acts. Christianity was thriving in Carthage and Alexandria centuries before England, Germany, or Scandinavia heard the name of Christ. If you find this kind of evidence-led Catholic teaching helpful, the link in the description keeps these videos coming. What does this mean for your prayer life today? 3 concrete things. First, when you pray the Rosary and call Mary the Mother of God, you are praying words that an African bishop fought for at Ephesus. Second, when you read the New Testament, you are reading a canon that was ratified at the Councils of Hippo in 393 and Carthage in 397, both held on African soil under African bishops. Third, when you study any serious Catholic theologian, from Aquinas to Newman to Benedict XVI, you are reading writers who quote Augustine on almost every page. When the Pope walked into Hippo on April 14, 2026, he was not bringing the church to Africa. He was returning, in the name of all of us, to one of the church's original homes. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you are thinking, but Augustine wrote in Latin. He was a Roman citizen. Calling him African is just modern identity politics. Fair enough, but here is what that objection misses. Open Augustine's Confessions, Book 1, and you will find him speaking of his Punic-speaking mother Monica and the Berber and Punic culture of his childhood. He repeatedly distinguished African Christianity from Italian Christianity. He was Roman and African, and Catholicism is precisely the tradition that says you do not have to choose. Christ himself is fully God and fully man. Augustine is fully Roman and fully African. In this case, the best explanation is not either or, but both and. I also want to speak with reverence to my Jewish friends watching this video. Some Jewish scholars rightly point out that Hosea chapter 11 verse 1 was originally about Israel collectively, not about an individual Messiah. And they are correct on the literal sense. The Catechism, paragraphs 116 and 117, teaches that the literal sense is the foundation of every spiritual sense. Matthew is not erasing Israel. He is reading Jesus as the embodiment of Israel the Son. This is the same kind of layered reading the rabbis themselves use. Peshat and Remez, the plain and the hinted. Israel really was in Egypt. Christ really was in Egypt. The typology layers it does not replace. The old covenant has not been revoked. The new covenant fulfills it. African Christianity stands inside that fulfillment, not against it. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a simple truth that the cameras almost missed. The Old Testament prefigured Africa as the cradle of God's saving work. The New Testament fulfilled it when Christ himself was hidden in Egypt and an African carried his cross. And the Catholic Church today carries that fulfillment forward every time we say Theotokos, every time we read the canon, those African councils closed, every time we open Augustine. 3 concrete steps for this week. Pray 1 decade of the Rosary, deliberately invoking the Mother of God, whom Cyril of Alexandria defended. Read Matthew chapter 2 slowly, and notice the Africa hidden in plain sight. and go to Mass on Sunday, remembering that the liturgy you celebrate has African ancestors. If this helped you, share it with a friend, subscribe, and check out our web app for daily Catholic resources and soul search. Once you see Africa in the Bible, you can no longer unsee Africa in the church.